Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Reimagined, a Hidden Compass YouTube series. I am your always host, Lauren Eckert, and I am very, very thrilled to welcome to the show today Kristina. Kristina Lynn is a wildlife biologist and environmental activist who shares an inside look into her life and her career via YouTube and Instagram. And her research in wildlife biologists includes many projects that we'll ask her about today that include things like understanding and assessing the influence of human development on wildlife species. And I would love on her YouTube channel how she shares both information about her career as a wildlife biologist, but also peeks into how she works conservation, ecology, and sustainability practices into her life and her own backyard. So I'm thrilled to have you here today, Kristina. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, it's my pleasure. I'm stoked to talk about your storytelling, but also your research. So maybe before we dive in, and I get into the reimagined set of questions, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you do or a project that you specifically have loved working on. Share with us a little bit about what life looks like in your career.
Yeah, so I've come into the world of ecology as quite a generalist. I've tried so many different projects and so many different fields, and found what I really love doing now is in the realm of applied ecology. So I like to work in kind of that cutting edge space where those principles that the researchers are discovering and writing about is actually being applied in the real world. So a lot of the big projects I really enjoy working on is we do a lot, at my work, I do a lot of restoration projects and a lot of recovery projects where it's taking the real world applied ecology side of things like pollution, habitat destruction, and creating ways to restore that habitat and to hold people accountable for harm to the environment. And so it kind of comes up with quite a multidisciplinary field. So wildlife is definitely my focus, and I love learning the ins and outs of wildlife habitat and how you can take those applied ecology and conservation principles and implement them in the real world when it's not as simple as a research project. And there's so many people's viewpoints that you have to take into account, and so many different uses of the land that you have to take into account when you're restoring wildlife habitat. And it's a really awesome challenge, and I really like it. So those are some of the interesting kind of things I've been working on lately, is a lot of those challenging projects of something. It's going to become a lot more common that we are going to have these degraded or damaged areas that need to be restored for the animals and for the people as well too. And having people work in that space, I think, and taking the science and the research into the real world and applying it and making sure those are scientists that are providing that advice, I think is something we're just going to see more and more kind of going forward.
I deeply appreciate that answer. I feel we've followed similar career trajectories in some ways. As a PhD student in the Applied Conservation Science Lab and someone who studies conservation conflicts, I couldn't agree more about the joy and frustration, but ultimately hope of working in these places of like applied, social dimensions, relationships, and conflict, and hoping that through application we can see better worlds come to be. Awesome. So in this series in Reimagined, we're interested in many themes, but one in particular that we talk with our guests a lot about is this idea of the importance, the joy, the excitement of escaping our individual comfort zones towards better science, better storytelling, better ways of being in the world. And I love your storytelling format. I think it reaches an audience that often we as scientists, whether we be wildlife biologists or others, forget in our ivory towers, so to say. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got started in science communication, particularly via YouTube, a platform I think not many scientists or biologists are on?
Yeah, so YouTube kind of came about in a funny way. I actually just loved watching YouTube videos,
Mm,
and I thought, I had these YouTubers that I watched, and I thought, I'll film a video as like a creative kind of exercise. And I actually started my YouTube channel, and it had nothing to do with science, and I was like doing recipe videos,
oh my gosh, I
and
love it.
it was just fun, like it's a
Hmm.
creative outlet, right? And then I posted a day in my life as a wildlife biologist video, and that was back when I was working in Alberta, and I filmed like a day of me in the field, and that just blew up
I
like
bet.
right away. And I realized it was because no one else was posting those sorts of videos on YouTube, and was people searching it. So like
Yeah.
people were searching like wildlife biologist day, and there was
Wow.
nothing there, or the things that were there was like something that a university put out, which didn't feel like very personal. And so then I started kind of putting these day in the life videos out there. And then I realized that that's the kind of stuff people wanted to see. And the comments I was getting on these videos was like just so amazing. Like people were saying, I never knew that like I could do this, or I didn't even know what it looked like. I didn't even know you could work, in the realm of wildlife biology. I thought it
Hmm.
was just something on TV. So I realized how, YouTube can be a platform, and social media in general, but definitely YouTube can be a platform to, inspire people who didn't know that job existed. And a lot of times the people who didn't know that job existed are like the people that we really want like coming into the
100%.
fields.
Yeah.
They don't know anyone who did that job, or they don't have like a family connection or anything
Hmm.
like that. So being able to reach directly to those people and not have there be like barriers, like, if it was a university talk, like there's already a lot of things that would impact people from getting there. It's like I could talk directly to people. And
Yeah.
that wasn't even my plan starting out, but it's what got me sticking with it and continuing to make videos for sure, was just how many people you can reach, and like the amount of like messages I get of people saying that I inspired them to go into the field is insane.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's so
Yeah.
great. As someone who I mentioned before we started recording, grew up in Iowa, uh, from a family who had no insight into sort of academia beyond early stages of degrees, I can really relate to the incredible value of knowing that jobs like wildlife biology or conservation science exist at all. It was not something I became aware of until I had the privilege of being at a university where I was exposed to it as a pathway. And so having this information available creates so much space when it's free and online, to overcome some of those barriers that keep the field, though there are still many more. Um, but can lead to people understanding from diverse backgrounds with diverse perspectives that there's this pathway that exists for them. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and it's
YouTube.
nice, like, too, that I could be the first influence in the wildlife field versus
Yeah,
like all the other things that could come at you, like that could be
totally.
quite toxic. Like, I'd like to kind of get the fundamentals of like, you deserve to be treated with respect
Yeah,
in the field, and you deserve to be here, and you're a scientist if you want to be a scientist and you're pursuing it. Like
yeah,
all of those things. It's nice to be able to sneak those in before people are exposed to the whole world of, what is science and
yeah.
some of the issues that we have in the field too.
The barriers that exist beyond just exposure, the barriers to continuing careers. Yeah, there's a number of toxic elements, unfortunately, still in play in a number of institutions, but it is really valuable to have that first touch point, you know, be someone who speaks to the value of equity and respect and compassion in an ecology or wildlife workplace. That is really beautiful. I also think that these ideas of what a scientist looked like are really pervasive, and often what a scientist looked like is an older white man in a lab coat. So being exposed to someone doing science in the field outside, who's a woman and gets to wear plaid shirts to work, I think is refreshing for a lot of folks. I knew it was for me. I was like, science can be beyond the lab. Like, that is incredible.
I
So
mean, same as you, like I didn't know that you could go into this field until I was in university for a different science. And then I had a
same,
ecology professor, and
same.
she was like amazing and I loved her.
You're like, you can be
Yeah,
outside for work.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's great. So it's funny that you bring up YouTube comments because this is something I wanted to ask you about. Uh, I checked out the comments under many of your videos, and there's such a wonderful supportive community that you've built through your platform. It really strikes me that we often are fearful to look in comment sections because they're very toxic corners of the internet. I'm sure you haven't escaped all of that toxicity. Um, but can you talk a little bit about, did you ever have any fear when you were putting yourself out there in this format about negative reactions from anonymous humans on the internet?
Oh, totally. And I get them. And some of my comment sections are very carefully
Uh-huh,
curated.
uh-huh.
Yeah, it's gotten better, I think. It used to be pretty bad. People seem to think that you existing on the internet is just like people can critique your
Fair
looks or
game. Yeah.
lately it's been the way that I talk. I've just get endless comments about the way that I talk and they'll always find something. Like,
Wild.
it's hard to give advice on that. Let me think for a second.
I'm partially selfishly asking because this is something I really grapple with as I try and, like you, I'm passionate about getting moving back into the world, much of the education I've been privileged to receive. I love the opportunity to provide free education resources online, but it can be scary to do so because criticism flows on the internet in a way that it doesn't in the real world. And because our brains have a negativity bias, we tend to see that one negative comment more than the 9 positive ones. So I'm really curious as to how you navigate that.
One actually really positive way that I have navigated that is building that supportive community, like
Mm,
close knit in person too, or,
sure.
within, our own communities. So sometimes when my comments rattling around in my brain, like, do I really look like that or sound like that? Or is this idea that I had just really this terrible idea, like the
Yeah.
commenters say it is? And then I go to a lot of my friends in real life and I'm like, I got this. And you most of the time you have a good friend, they're gonna reassure you. Don't worry about it. Like you're doing great. Think about all the
Yeah.
people you're inspiring and all the people that you're helping. Um, these people are just probably 14-year-old boys in their
Yeah, fair. That's fair.
parents' basement. And I mean, I'm separating like valid criticism because that can actually be really hard too.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's like,
absolutely.
yeah, if you get a comment about something superficial, it hurts. But when you actually get a comment that really hits at your sensitive points,
Yeah.
that is valid, that can be even more difficult. And
Mhm.
I just try to take away anything that I need to take away. So if it's a comment about you didn't think about this perspective, like
Mhm.
you are
Mhm.
ignorant about this, instead of immediately getting defensive, like I try to pull out those if there is anything useful in that criticism and
Yeah.
take it away and not respond. I almost never respond because I need to just think over my thoughts about it and see if it's something that I want to incorporate in and change. And there has been a
Yeah.
lot of comments where it actually did make me change the next time around and think of ways to approach the problem or issue differently. But usually I try to just immediately block any of the negative comments about superficial things. I
Yeah.
don't need to see it. Block
Yeah.
and move on. Forget it happened.
It's not an intended contribution. I hear you. I think it's really valuable to separate in your answer to that question criticism that comes from a place perhaps of wanting to improve your work or your outreach versus what often exists on the internet, which is this like culture of trolling or whatever it may be. People get an adrenaline rush from posting something mean on a stranger's timeline. So that I really appreciate that differentiation and power to you for navigating that because I do think, especially in platforms where women have any visual representation, it seems to rouse more vocal criticism than would men engage. So yeah, I think that's great. If any listeners are thinking about YouTube video creation or content creation, do you have any advice for them? I mean, you just gave me some personal advice, but overall advice about how to navigate those platforms that you have developed over the years?
Yeah, I think I actually just had a call with someone giving YouTube advice to beginners. So I've got a few kind of thoughts
Perfect.
prepared on that if you're interested in going down that world. And I think this is applicable to the world of science communication and social
Yeah,
media in general, is you got to kind of define the reason or find your purpose of what you're trying to do. Are you doing it for fun? Are you doing it to spread the word of a cause that you're really interested in? Are you doing it to network? Are you doing it to build a business? But no matter why you're doing it, I think you really need to enjoy it and have fun doing it, because otherwise you're not going to stick with it. And if it
yeah,
feels tough and hard and uncomfortable, you don't need to exist on social media. There's other formats for that.
totally.
In terms of like if it's just something you're fundamentally struggling with. But if you do find like the creative aspects are fun and challenging, and the comments that you get are exciting, I think one of the biggest things is people quit when they don't see that they're not getting a lot of views and likes and like that feedback right away. And that can be really tough because
Hmm.
social media is so oversaturated with people wanting to, get attention, like, and not even from a completely negative perspective, but like, you put on Instagram and there's so many things competing for your attention and so many interesting people and people doing cool
Totally.
things. It's really hard to compete with everyone, basically. So my advice there would be find the joy and the happiness in doing it, and using it as a creative outlet, or the people that you do inspire and your small audience you're able to talk to, and just enjoy it and think a little bit less about like, well, I don't have 10,000 followers or
Yeah.
100,000, because it always just keeps like going up. Because
The goalpost moves
the
as you,
goalpost
yeah.
moves. Exactly. Like there's people who are just like think they're done and they're so excited just to get 100, and that's amazing.
Hmm.
And then there's people who are like, I don't have 100,000, like no one
Yeah.
likes my
Yeah.
content. So focusing on the little audience you do have and making, you know, content for them and the people that you're like hoping to reach, and not worrying too much about the stuff down the line, because people will see your enthusiasm and they'll want to follow you.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. In particular, that there is this pressure, I think, to be online, to be available, to be vulnerable, which are all really rewarding things if they are rewarding for you individually. But that's not the case for everyone. There are so many platforms and ways through which to make the world a better place. But yeah, I've personally had to rethink, especially my social media. I found something happened to me during the pandemic that I know a couple of folks in my life have experienced, where like I changed my relationship with social media a little bit. I enjoy this longer form content where I have opportunity to chat with folks and ask questions and get deep into topics and explore nuance. And so I've kind of let myself shift from a format I used to really enjoy, which is the short format of something like Instagram, to longer format stuff. And I think that comes from chasing the joy that I get from from the many ways we can engage. The joy shifts, but sharing with folks and talking with folks still remains at the center of like why engage. So I think that's a really good way to think about it. Like if this is something you're thinking about doing before you launch in and chase dopamine in the form of likes and comments, there's this fundamental what delights you about the platform or creativity or engagement that has to be answered. I think that's really well said.
Yeah, and the other piece of advice I would give too, because this is actually something that my friend Connell Bradwell, who's
Yeah.
also a wildlife presenter, he does science communication. We were just talking about this, was especially as you get further along in the journey, um, taking moments and days, weeks, trips that don't involve making content
Yeah, I
is
bet.
is so important, because you can't turn like the things that you love, your mindful activities, into these like content farming like activities where you're just there with your phone like, oh, the chickadee just landed right there, I got to get this for the gram, and then not like being in the moment. Like maybe
Totally.
you'll have those trips and you'll focus on taking your photos or whatever, but also having moments where you're just enjoying and remembering why you're doing this in the first place.
A human alive in the world experiencing the planet. Yeah, yeah. I think that's good advice for everyone. I think social media is a double-edged sword in so many ways. There are so many wonderful aspects of it. I've learned so much from so many people across these platforms. But I do even notice in myself sometimes, as a very cliche example, a beautiful sunset, there's this impulse, like I have to capture this and share it, or else I don't know, like wasting its value or not fulfilling my social contract or something ridiculous, some ridiculous impulse. And I need to work on remembering to leave the phone at home some days, to turn it off, because even if you're not deeply embedded in a content creation community, I think there's a pressure for all of us to show glimpses into our life that are happen to be beautiful, like chickadees or sunsets. That's a great piece of advice that I need to pin on a post-it note on my computer. Oh, wonderful. I'm mindful of time, so I think one more question for you. So we haven't touched a ton on any of your long-term goals. So we've gotten into a little bit of like the ways your values drive the outreach and the work you do. Given your experiences in, wildlife biology and restoration sciences, in science communication outreach, all of that together, what future do you dream of? Whether that be for you as you move forward in these goals, or for the world as you work towards ecology, restoration, conservation.
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of the goals that I have is, I think I'm doing a pretty good job at it so far, is keeping my work that I do like at work and on the social. Let me start over. Some of the goals that I have for myself is keeping the work that I'm doing in general as something that's going to continue to inspire people and reach people that maybe wouldn't already know about wildlife biology, and not just wildlife biology, but some of the more niche concepts. And that's what I make
Sure.
some of my videos about. So like I have a video about rewilding, and I have a video about deep ecology, and some of these more the philosophical concepts that people know a little bit less about. And certainly a lot of times I'm not the most appropriate presenter on some of them, but just getting some of these ideas of looking at science and ecology in a different lens. Traditional ecological knowledge, like I'm certainly not a holder of traditional ecological knowledge, but just introducing the term to people and giving them resources and drawing them in with the cute animal picture, and they click on the thumbnail and it's like, let's talk about all these other facets about ecology and science is something I'm really interested in continuing to pursue. And I think just showing people too, like you briefly touched on it, from the sustainable living perspective, I don't think I've done enough in that realm that I could be doing. And now I just bought a place last year, and I have so many opportunities to
Exciting.
to showcase like all the things you could do, not only if you own your own house, but in general, just with your living and your lifestyle, that you can take like these things and these values you have from the ecology world and work them into your everyday life. And that's not to say that, consumers are the end all be all of what
Totally.
the climate
Yes.
is going to be like. But I find just in these times, feeling like you have just a little bit of power in the choices that you make can really just help from a mental perspective and an eco-anxiety perspective, at least for me. So that's an avenue I want to explore a little bit further. And I want to start building my community out a bit more. Like there's so many other science communicators in this space, and I feel like there could be some really cool collaboration opportunities and some bringing different voices together. That's something I also want to look into a lot more. That's one of the beauties and the upsides of social media, is to have access to those sorts of people and voices.
Yeah, and I think I don't find I don't want to use the word silver linings. There have been no silver linings of COVID, but I think one lesson we've all learned is that we can collaborate even when we can't be together. And I'm hopeful that for these sort of more niche areas of science communication, the tools we've all gained during COVID to work virtually, to exist virtually, to connect virtually, we can draw upon to build stronger networks. Because I totally agree. I think there's so much energy and passion and so many people working in these spaces that we could have a lot of fun all together working on collaborations. I would love if you did more sustainability tip videos. I agree so deeply with your viewpoint on that, your caveat that consumers, while we can make some changes, obviously corporations that profit off of the destruction of the planet, we should be focusing our energy there collectively as we organize and call for transformation in society. But I also find that whether it's to deal with like despair or the feeling of powerlessness or eco anxiety, trying to find ways to live by my values feels good. And so some combination of those individual behaviors, those community behaviors, and also calling for top-down change, I think is really valuable. So I'd love to see more of that. I'll be watching for those videos, no pressure. But
Yeah,
I
no,
think you've
and
done
I
a
think
beautiful job with those so far.
so much of what exists in that space already is people purchasing
Oh,
items to fill like
100%,
nutritious.
100%. Like I get this beautiful glass bottle and I'm like,
I'm like trying to do so much for free
yeah,
and make changes that'll actually be like cheaper options
yeah,
and easier options over time. And I'm experimenting with a lot of different stuff, and it can be just such a fun space. I've been in and out of a few dumpsters lately, trying
nice.
trying to source everything with all my
Heck
projects
yes.
as free and cheap as possible.
Winter's the best time to dumpster dive. I find from hypothetical experience.
This is all hypothetical.
Oh, that's great. I would love to see more of that because I agree. Like there are some creators in the space who are really working on like I think there's a lot of aesthetics around minimalist and zero waste culture and getting into the reality and how free DIY solutions that are sustainable can still be beautiful, even if you didn't have to go out and buy it. And hopefully you didn't have to go out and buy it because sustainability.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would love to see more of that and we will look forward to it. Before we wrap, do you have any links, any resources you'd like to share with the audience? Of course, we'll hyperlink to your YouTube channel and your Instagram. Anything else you'd like to share with folks?
Yeah, YouTube and Instagram would be the great kind of place to go because I have a lot of resources in each of my videos
Okay.
in the description section. So if you're interested on a particular topic, check out some of the links that I have in the description section of that video, or feel free to DM me on Instagram. That's usually the best way to get in touch if you have any other questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time and your outreach. I love watching your videos and we'll continue to do so.
Thank you.